My son kicked me out with only $15 in my pocket. I bought a ruined house that everyone said was garbage, but when a stranger looked at my old car, he whispered something that froze my blood. The brakes did not fail by accident. Your son has been planning your end for 5 years. I trembled not from fear, but from a rage I had not felt in decades. Open the walls, I told them. Open the walls and see what he hid. If you are watching this, take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is a nightmare that became my reality. The black garbage bag hit the snow with a dull thud that sounded like a body falling. I stared at it, watching a single white shirt of mine spill out onto the frozen pavement. The Chicago wind, that bitter hawk that cuts right through your bones, whipped against my face, but I was too numb to feel the cold. I was only 70, but in that moment I felt 1,000 years old. Dad. You have 5 minutes to get that junk off my driveway, Brandon said. His voice was not the voice of the boy I had taught to throw a baseball. It was the voice of a stranger, cold and detached, as if he were speaking to a stray dog he wanted to shoo away. Tiffany does not want to see your face when she gets back from the spa. I looked up at him. He stood in the doorway of the house I had built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago. I remembered laying that brickwork. I remembered mixing the mortar in the summer heat of 1984, wiping sweat from my eyes, while my late wife Catherine brought me iced tea. Every beam, every joist, every nail in that house had my sweat and blood on it. And now my son, the boy who used to sit on my shoulders while I sanded the banisters, was standing there in a cashmere sweater. I paid for telling me to leave. Brandon, what are you doing? I asked, my voice cracking. I just signed the papers 6 months ago. You said nothing would change. You said this was just for taxes. Brandon let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Taxes. Yeah, that is what we told you. But let us be real, Dad. You are losing it. You left the stove on last week. You are a danger to yourself, and frankly, you are depressing to be around. We are starting a family soon. We cannot have a senile old man wandering the halls like a ghost. I am not senile, I roared, the anger finally piercing through the shock. I walked toward the door, my heavy boots crunching on the ice. I stepped forward not to hurt him, but to make him look me in the eye. I was Victor Halloway. I was a general contractor who had built half the foundations in this suburb. I was not an invalid. Get back, Brandon shouted, flinching, as if I had raised a hand. He slammed the heavy oak door in my face. The sound echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot. I pounded on the wood. Open this door, Brandon. Open it. This is my house. I built this door. I hung this frame. You cannot do this. I heard the deadbolt slide home. That distinct click was the sound of my life being locked away. I stood there, shivering, my knuckles raw from pounding on the wood. I could hear muffled voices inside. Then the silence of the winter afternoon settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I did not know what to do. My truck, my trusty 1978 Chevy Silverado, was parked at the curb. It was the only thing I had not signed over to him because he called it a piece of rust that embarrassed him. I walked over to the garbage bag, my hands shaking as I gathered my clothes. A pair of work pants, 2 flannel shirts, a framed photo of Catherine that had shattered in the fall. I picked up the photo, wiping the snow off Catherine's smiling face. She would have torn him apart for this. Before I could even load the bag into the truck, I saw the flashing lights, blue and red reflected against the pristine white snow. 2 police cruisers pulled up, screeching, to a halt in front of my driveway. I stood up, relieved. Good. The police. I could explain this. I could tell them about the deed, about the lie, about how I had been tricked. Officer, I said, stepping forward as a young policeman stepped out of the car. His hand was resting on his holster. Sir, step away from the house, the officer commanded. I froze. No, son, you do not understand. I live here. My son, he locked me out. The front door opened again. This time it was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a silk robe, her face a mask of terrified innocence. She rushed out, ignoring the cold tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Officer, thank God you are here," she cried, running past me to the policeman. "He is having an episode again." We tried to calm him down, but he started screaming and pounding on the door. He threatened to burn the house down. "We are so scared." I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I had never threatened to burn anything. "That is a lie," I shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her. "She is lying. I built this house." "Sir, calm down," the officer said, his voice hardening. He looked at me, an old man in a dirty work coat with wild hair and a red face. Then he looked at Tiffany, young, beautiful, and articulate. It was not a fair fight. "He has dementia," Officer Brandon said, stepping out behind his wife. He put a protective arm around her. "We have been trying to get him into a facility, but he gets aggressive. We just want him safe, but we cannot have him here. He is dangerous." My heart hammered against my ribs. Aggressive dementia. That was the label they were slapping on me. Once you are labeled crazy, nothing you say matters. The truth becomes a delusion. My righteous anger becomes a symptom. "Sir," the officer turned to me, his stance wide. "The owners of this property have asked you to leave. If you do not vacate the premises immediately, I will have to arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." "Trespassing," I whispered. "On the land I bought in 1980. On the driveway I poured concrete for." I looked at the officer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the vest and tell him to check the county records, to check the dates, to see that I had only signed the quitclaim deed 6 months ago. But I saw the look in his eyes. He saw a problem he wanted to solve quickly. He saw a nuisance. "I will go," I said, my voice barely a rasp. I grabbed the black garbage bag and threw it into the bed of my Silverado. The truck was covered in a layer of ice. I climbed into the cab. The seat was freezing. The smell of old leather and stale coffee, usually a comfort, now smelled like poverty. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was an old bifold I had carried for 10 years. I opened it. The credit cards were there. My Platinum Visa, my debit card. I pulled out the Visa and looked at it. Brandon is an authorized user, I thought, but technically it is my account. I looked back at the house. Brandon was talking to the police, nodding solemnly. He handed the officer a card, probably his business card. Real estate agent of the year. I knew with a sinking feeling in my gut that the cards would not work. If he had planned this, if he had the police here, he had already made the calls. He had power of attorney. I had signed it when I went in for hip surgery last year and never revoked it. I opened the billfold. Inside there was a $10 bill and a $5 bill. $15. That was it. That was the sum total of a lifetime of hard labor. $15. I had millions in assets an hour ago. Now I had enough for 3 gallons of gas and a sandwich. I put the key in the ignition. The old truck groaned. The starter whined, struggling against the cold. "Please," I begged, "do not die on me now. Do not let me be stuck here in front of them." The engine caught with a roar and a cloud of black smoke. The Chevy vibrated, a rough, angry mechanical beast. It was the only thing loyal to me. I put it in gear and pulled away from the curb. I did not look at the police officer. I did not look at Tiffany. I drove down the street, the familiar houses of my neighbors passing by. The Wilsons, the Millers, the Garcias, people I had barbecued with, people who thought I was living the retired dream. They had no idea I was currently homeless. I drove until I reached the Walmart parking lot 3 miles away. I parked in the back, away from the store lights, where the other RVs and trucks sometimes parked for the night. I turned off the engine to save gas. The silence rushed back in, colder than before. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, watching my breath fog up the windshield. Before I continue my story, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever trusted family with your life, only to have them stab you in the back when you were most vulnerable? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you have ever had to rebuild from zero. Your comments help me feel less alone in this truck. Night fell. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees. I wrapped myself in the flannel shirts from the garbage bag, layering them over my coat. It wasn't enough. My feet were numb blocks of ice. I could not sleep. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I was afraid to spend my $15. What if I needed gas to get to a shelter? What if the truck broke down? My mind kept going back to the house. I pictured them. I wiped the frost off the side window and looked in the direction of my neighborhood. I could not see the house from here, but I could see it in my mind. I imagined Brandon and Tiffany in the living room. The fire would be crackling in the fireplace I built. The heat would be blasting. They would be opening a bottle of wine. Maybe that expensive Cabernet I had been saving for my 71st birthday. They would be clinking glasses. To us, they would say. To the house, to the future. They thought I was gone. They thought I was a confused old man who would freeze to death or end up in a state ward mumbling about the past until I died and stopped being an embarrassment. They thought they had won. I looked at my hands. They were calloused, scarred, large. These were hands that could crush a rock or cradle a baby. They were shaking now, but not from the cold. They were shaking from rage. I closed my eyes and saw Catherine's face. I remembered what she told me before she died. Victor, you are the strongest man I know, but you are too kind. Do not let the world break your kindness. I am sorry, Catherine, I whispered to the empty truck. Kindness died tonight on that driveway. I touched the dashboard of the Chevy. They took my home. They took my money. They took my dignity. But they made one mistake. They left me my tools, and they left me with nothing to lose. I remembered something then, a memory that pushed through the fog of shock. 20 years ago, I had bought a property in Gary, Indiana. It was a foreclosure, a wreck of a Victorian house in a bad neighborhood. I had bought it for pennies, thinking I would flip it. But life got busy, Catherine got sick, and I forgot about it. It was just a line item on my tax returns that Brandon had probably overlooked because the value was listed as zero. It was a ruin, a shell, a place where junkies slept. But it had 4 walls and a roof, and it was mine. I checked the gas gauge. 1/4 of a tank. Gary was 30 miles away. I could make it. I sat up straight. The shivering stopped. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest, replacing the heartbreak. Enjoy the wine, Brandon, I said aloud. Enjoy the warmth. Because winter is coming for you, son, and this time I will be the one holding the lock. I turned the key. The Chevy roared to life again, sounding like a war cry in the silent parking lot. I put it in drive and headed toward the highway, toward the ruin, toward the truth that was waiting for me in the walls of a house I had forgotten. I did not know it then, but I was driving toward a discovery that would change everything. I was driving toward a mechanic named Mick, who would look at this very truck and tell me that my wife's accident was no accident at all. But first I had to survive the night, and I had to claim my kingdom of ash. I tried to close my eyes, but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. The cab of my truck was freezing, and my breath hung in the air like a ghost. Just as I started to drift off, a sharp rap on the window made me jump. A security guard shone a flashlight into my eyes. "You cannot park here, sir. Move it along, or I will call the cops." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I turned the key and prayed. The engine sputtered but caught. As I drove out of the lot, the heater blew weak, lukewarm air that did nothing to chase away the chill in my bones. My mind drifted back to 6 months ago. The memory was so vivid it hurt more than the cold. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Catherine had reupholstered years ago. Brandon was kneeling beside me holding a stack of papers. His face was full of concern. "Dad, you know I love you," he said, his voice soft and persuasive. "The estate tax laws are changing. If something happens to you, the government will take almost half of everything you built. Do you want that?" I shook my head. Of course not. I wanted my legacy to go to him, to his future children. "Sign this quitclaim deed, Dad," he continued, pressing a pen into my hand. "It just puts the house in my name. Nothing changes for you. You live here until the end. I promise. I swear on Mom's memory." I looked at him. I saw my little boy. I saw the son Catherine and I had raised. I did not see the shark waiting to smell blood. I signed. I signed away 40 years of sweat and equity with a shaky hand, thinking I was protecting our family. I was protecting a viper. The memory made me sick. I pulled over at a gas station just to get out of the moving coffin that was my truck. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. It was 2 a.m, but I knew one person who might answer. I dialed the number of old Mr. Henderson, my attorney for 30 years. He picked up on the 4th ring, his voice groggy. "Victor, is everything all right?" "No, John," I said, my voice trembling. "I need you to check something for me. Did Brandon use the power of attorney I signed last year for anything else?" There was a long silence on the other end. The kind of silence that screams bad news. "Victor, I tried to call you months ago," Henderson said, his voice suddenly awake and serious. "Brandon told me you were too sick to talk. He said you instructed him to liquidate the rental properties in Oak Park and the cabin in Wisconsin. He sold them, Victor. All of them. The money went into a trust under his name. I felt the ground beneath me sway. The cabin. The place where Catherine and I spent our anniversaries. Gone. Sold like a used appliance. And he had blocked my lawyer from reaching me. He had isolated me systematically. So I have nothing," I whispered. "Just the house in Gary," I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. Henderson sighed. "The property on Jackson Street. Yes, it is still in your name. Brandon probably did not think it was worth the paperwork. It is listed as condemned, Victor. You cannot live there." I hung up. I did not want to hear his pity. Condemned. Ruined. Just like me. I got back in the truck. Chicago was behind me now, a city of lights and lies. I pointed the Chevy southeast towards Indiana. The snow was falling harder now, blinding white sheets that hypnotized me. I was leaving the state I had called home my entire life. I was 70 years old, and I was running away like a fugitive. The heater finally gave up, completely blowing ice-cold air onto my legs. I wrapped the flannel shirts tighter around myself. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought about Tiffany's smirk. I thought about Brandon's fake tears. They were probably sleeping soundly in my bed right now, warm and secure. The rage kept me awake. It was the only fuel I had left. The road to Gary was dark and empty. The industrial landscape rose up around me like the skeletons of dead giants. Rusting factories, smokestacks that had not smoked in years. This was where I was heading. To the graveyard of the American dream. And in the middle of it was my house. My last stand. Suddenly the truck lurched. The engine coughed once, twice, and then died. The power steering went out, and I wrestled the heavy beast to the shoulder of the highway. Silence swallowed me instantly. No. No, no, no. I turned the key. Click. Click. Nothing. I slammed my hand against the dashboard. Not now. Please, not now. I looked out the window. I was miles from the nearest exit. The wind howled, shaking the truck. The temperature was dropping. I checked my phone. 7% battery. I could call for a tow, but with $15 I could not pay them. I was trapped. I sat there in the dark, and for the first time, fear truly gripped me. Not the fear of losing my house, but the primal fear of dying alone in a frozen metal box on the side of a forgotten highway. I looked at the passenger seat where Catherine used to sit. I could almost see her there, smiling, telling me it would be all right. But she was gone, and I was very cold. I reached for the door handle. I had to check under the hood. Maybe it was just a loose wire. Maybe I could fix it. I was a builder. I fixed things. I pushed the door open, and the wind hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of me. I stepped out into the knee-deep snow, my boots sinking. I popped the hood and stared at the engine block in the dim light of my dying phone. It was then that I saw it. A wire had been cut. Not frayed. Cut. Cleanly. Just like the brake line Mick would find later. But I did not know that yet. I just thought it was old age. I thought my truck was dying just like its owner. I stood there shivering in the snow, staring at the severed wire, and I realized that the cold was not just outside. It was inside me. And if I did not get this engine started, I would never see the sun rise over my ruined house. I would just be another frozen body found in the snow, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. But I refused to die here. Not like this. Not while Brandon was drinking my wine. I grabbed my toolbox from the back, my fingers stiff and clumsy. I had to splice that wire. I had to make a connection. I had to survive. Because if I died tonight, they won for good. And I would rot in hell before I let them win. I knelt in the snow with my pocket knife clamped between my teeth, stripping the insulation off a spare piece of speaker wire I had found under the seat. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the pliers twice, but I forced them to be steady. I was a master carpenter, not a tremoring old invalid. I found the severed ends of the ignition wire. It was a clean cut made by a sharp blade, and seeing it up close made bile rise in my throat. This was not wear and tear. This was an assassination attempt on an old truck. I twisted the copper strands together, my fingers numb and clumsy, wrapping them tight with electrical tape. It was an ugly fix, a bandage on a bullet wound, but it had to hold. I climbed back into the cab and turned the key. The engine wheezed once, then roared to life. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I did not waste a second. I threw the truck into gear and merged back onto the highway, leaving the scene of my near death behind. I drove through the rest of the night, fueled by adrenaline and a hatred that burned hotter than the heater ever could. By the time I crossed the state line into Indiana, the sky was turning a bruised purple color. The industrial skyline of Gary rose up like a rusted jawbone against the horizon. Smokestacks stood silent and ghostly. This place had been the steel capital of the world once, just like I had been a king in my own home. Now we were both just scraps of history people wanted to forget. I navigated through streets lined with boarded-up storefronts and potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. I turned onto Jackson Street. My heart sank. I remembered the house as a fixer-upper of Victorian beauty, with good bones that just needed some love. What I saw before me was a corpse. The roof had partially collapsed over the porch like a broken eyelid. The windows were gone, replaced by jagged teeth of glass or rotting plywood covered in spray paint. The yard was a jungle of dead weeds and trash waist-high in some places. A rusted shopping cart lay on its side near the front steps. I parked the truck across the street and just stared. This was it. This was my kingdom. I stepped out and the smell hit me instantly. Damp rot, burning plastic, and something metallic like old blood. I walked up the driveway, kicking aside empty beer cans and fast food wrappers that had been bleached white by the sun. I was crazy. I had to be crazy to think I could survive here. "Hey, you get away from there!" The voice was sharp and authoritative. I froze. A police cruiser had rolled up silently behind my truck. A young officer was stepping out, his hand resting on his service weapon. He looked tired, and he looked like he had zero patience for vagrants. "I am not doing anything wrong, officer," I said, raising my hands slowly. "I own this property." The officer laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Yeah, and I own the Taj Mahal. Step away from the building. We have had enough trouble with squatters starting fires in these abandoned lots. Move along before I take you in." "I am not a squatter," I said, my voice rising. "My name is Victor Halloway. I bought this house 20 years ago." I reached for my back pocket to get my wallet, but the officer tensed, drawing his weapon halfway out of the holster. "Do not reach for anything," he barked. "Turn around, hands on the hood of the car." I felt the cold steel of the car hood against my cheek as he patted me down. The humiliation was a physical weight. Yesterday, I was a respected member of my community. Today, I was being treated like a criminal in a driveway full of garbage. "Check my truck," I said, pressing my face against the metal. "Under the passenger seat. There is a blue folder. The deed is in there. Please, just look." The officer grunted, pushing me to stay put. He walked over to my truck, looking inside with a flashlight. I held my breath. That folder had been there for a decade, buried under maps and oil rags. If I had thrown it out, if I had moved it, I was going to jail. I heard the rustle of papers. Seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. Finally, the officer walked back. He was holding a yellowed piece of paper. He looked at it, then at my ID, then at me. His posture softened just a fraction. "Victor Halloway," he read. "This deed is from 2004. You have not paid taxes on this dump in 3 years. The county was about to seize it." "I will pay them," I said, straightening up and brushing the dirt off my coat. "As soon as the banks open, I will sort it out. But right now, this is my property, and I am not trespassing." The officer handed me back the paper. He looked at the house, then back at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Look, Mr. Halloway, technically it is yours, but you cannot stay here. It is condemned. There is no power, no water, and the structure is unsafe. Plus, this is not a neighborhood for a man your age. The guys who use this place as a shooting gallery, they do not ask for deeds." "I have nowhere else to go, son," I said, looking him in the eye. "It is either this or the street." He sighed, shaking his head. "I did not see you okay. But if I find you dead in there from hypothermia or an overdose, do not say I did not warn you." He got back in his cruiser and drove off slowly, watching me in his rearview mirror until he turned the corner. I was alone again. I turned to the house. The front door was nailed shut with plywood, but the wood was rotten. I used a crowbar from my truck to pry it open. The wood groaned and splintered, giving way with a dusty exhale. I stepped inside. It was worse than the outside. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. Sunlight filtered through the holes in the roof, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes. The floorboards were warped and covered in debris. I saw used needles scattered in the corner like confetti. Graffiti covered the elegant wallpaper I remembered from years ago. I walked through the living room, testing each step to make sure the floor would hold me. My boots crunched on broken glass. I found a corner in what used to be the dining room that was relatively clear. I dragged an old overturned table upright. It wobbly, but it stood. I went back to the truck to get my supplies, my tools, a sleeping bag I kept for emergencies, and the black garbage bag of clothes Brandon had thrown at me. I hauled everything inside, creating a small perimeter of safety in the chaos. I needed to clean a spot to sleep. I needed to secure the door. I grabbed the garbage bag and dumped it onto the table to sort through what I had. My clothes spilled out, my work shirts, a pair of heavy socks, and then something slid out from between the folds of a sweater and clattered onto the table. It was the silver picture frame I had grabbed from the driveway. The glass was cracked, but the photo was still inside. It was a picture of Catherine and me on our 30th anniversary. We were laughing, holding champagne glasses. I picked it up, intending to wipe the dust off Catherine's face. I wanted to see her smile. I wanted to tell her I had made it. But when I looked closely, my blood turned to ice. The photo had been defaced. A thick, angry red X had been drawn over Catherine's face with a permanent marker. Her eyes were scratched out. The marker strokes were violent, deep enough to tear the glossy paper. I stared at it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. This was not random damage from the fall. This was deliberate. This was hatred. But I had just packed this bag. Or rather, Brandon had packed it. He had thrown it out to me. I realized with a sick twisting in my gut that this photo had been in the house, in my bedroom. Brandon must have done this before he threw my things into the bag. He had taken the time to desecrate the image of his own mother before kicking his father out into the snow. Why? Why would he do this? He was greedy, yes. He wanted the house, yes. But this was evil. This was a deep personal loathing I had never seen. I touched the red ink. It looked fresh. I looked around the rotting house, the shadows stretching long across the floor. I thought I was here just to survive. I thought I was here to rebuild. But holding that scarred photo, I realized I was here for something else. I was here to find out who my son really was, and as the wind howled through the broken windows sounding like a woman crying, I knew that the answer was going to destroy one of us. I did not sleep much that first night. The house made noises, groaning and settling, as if it were alive and in pain. Or maybe that was just me. But when the sun came up, bathing the dust and decay in harsh morning light, I was already up. I grabbed a pry bar and started on the floor. The wood was rotten soft as a sponge in places, and every board I ripped up screamed in protest. It was hard work, brutal work, but the physical pain in my back and shoulders felt good. It was better than the pain in my heart. By noon, I was covered in sweat and grime, looking more like a feral animal than a man. I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn joist when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. I tensed, gripping the pry bar tighter. Was the cop back? Was it another junkie looking for a place to crash? I walked to the window, peering through the jagged hole where glass used to be. A man was standing in the driveway looking at my truck. He was big, a bear of a man, with grease-stained coveralls and arms covered in faded tattoos. He had a military look about him, the kind of guy who had seen things and survived. He was holding 2 steaming styrofoam cups. "Hey, in there," the man called out. His voice was rough like gravel in a mixer. "You plan on tearing that whole place down by yourself, or do you want some coffee first?" I hesitated, but the smell of the coffee drifted through the broken window, and my stomach rumbled so loud I thought he might hear it. I put down the pry bar and walked out onto the porch. "I am Mick," the man said, nodding toward the auto repair shop across the street. "I run the place over there. Been watching you work since dawn. You got some serious hustle for an old guy." "No offense." "None taken," I said, taking the cup he offered. The warmth of it seeped into my frozen fingers. "I am Victor." Mick looked at the house, then back at me. "I thought this place was a teardown. City has been threatening to bulldoze it for years. You crazy or just stubborn?" "A bit of both," I said, taking a sip. The coffee was black and strong, just how I liked it. "And I have nowhere else to go." Mick nodded slowly, his eyes scanning me. He did not ask for details. Men like Mick did not pry. They judged you by what you did, not what you said. And he saw me working. That was enough. "Nice truck," he said, gesturing to the Chevy with his chin. 1978 Silverado, right? Don't see many of those still running, especially not in this rust belt." "It is a survivor," I said. "Like me." Mick walked around the truck, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the undercarriage. He frowned. He set his coffee down on the hood and knelt in the dirt. "You got a leak," he said. "I saw a spot on the ground where you were parked earlier. Mind if I take a look?" "I cannot help myself. I am a mechanic. It is a sickness." "Go ahead," I said. "It gave me trouble last night." Wire was cut. Mick slid under the front bumper. I heard him tapping metal, muttering to himself. I leaned against the porch railing, feeling the first moment of peace I had felt in 2 days. It was nice to just talk about trucks, to talk about something simple and mechanical. Not lawyers, not betrayal, just metal and oil. Then the tapping stopped. The silence stretched out. It went on for too long. "Mick," I called out. "Everything okay under there?" He did not answer. He slid out from under the truck slowly. He did not stand up immediately. He sat on the frozen ground, wiping his hands on a rag. When he looked up at me, his face had changed. The friendly neighbor look was gone. In its place was a look of cold, hard seriousness. The kind of look a doctor gives you before delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Victor," he said quietly, "you said you drove this here from Chicago." "Yeah," I said, feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Why?" "Come here," he said. "You need to see this." I walked over my boots, heavy in the dirt. I knelt beside him. He pointed to a black rubber hose near the front wheel. It was wet with fluid. "That is your brake line," Mick said. "And see that slit right there?" I squinted. There was a thin, clean gash in the rubber. It was not a tear. It was precise. That did not happen from road debris. "Victor," Mick said, his voice low. "That was done with a blade. A box cutter or a razor. Someone sliced it. Not all the way through. Just enough so that the pressure would build up and burst it when you hit the brakes hard, like in an emergency stop." I stared at the cut. My brain refused to process it at first. "Someone cut my brakes." "Who has access to this truck?" Victor, Mick asked. "Because whoever did this, they did not want you to just break down. They wanted you dead. If you had been on the highway doing 60 and had to stop, you would have been a stain on the asphalt." I fell back, sitting in the dirt. The world started to spin. Dead. They wanted me dead. And then the memory hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Catherine. 3 days before she died. She had borrowed my truck because her car was in the shop. She drove it to the grocery store. She came back and told me the pedal felt a little soft. I told her I would check it, but I forgot. I got busy. And then 2 days later, Brandon came over. He said he would take the truck to get it washed and checked for me as a favor. He brought it back the next day. And the day after that, Catherine took the truck again to go visit her sister. She never made it. The police said she lost control on the curvy road near the lake. They said there were no skid marks. They said she must have fallen asleep or had a medical episode. They said the truck was too mangled to tell if there was a mechanical failure. But there were no skid marks because she could not brake. I covered my mouth, my hand trembling. A sound escaped me, a raw, wounded noise that I could not hold back. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh my God." "What is it?" Mick asked, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "My wife," I choked out, tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. "She died in this truck 5 years ago. She was driving this truck." Mick's grip on my shoulder tightened. He looked at the brake line again, then back at me. His eyes were dark with understanding. "This cut is fresh, Victor," he said. "This one was meant for you. But if you are saying your wife died in a similar way, then we are not talking about a vandalism. We are talking about a pattern." I looked at the house. The house Brandon had kicked me out of. I thought about his urgency to cremate her. No autopsy, he had insisted. Mom would not want to be cut open. "We need to let her rest." I thought about how he had handled the insurance, how he had bought that new sports car a month later. He killed her. The realization did not come as a question. It came as a fact, solid and heavy as a brick. My son killed his mother, and he had tried to kill me. He had sent me out into a snowstorm in a sabotaged truck, hoping I would crash and die so he could collect whatever was left and erase me completely. I looked at Mick. I saw the horror in his eyes, but I also saw something else. I saw anger, the righteous anger of a good man witnessing evil. Victor Mick said, his voice steady. "We are going to fix this line. We are going to fix it right now, and then you are going to tell me everything, because nobody does this to a man and walks away, not on my watch." I nodded, wiping the tears from my face with my dirty sleeve. I stood up. My knees were weak, but my resolve was iron. "Fix it," I said. "Fix it so I can drive, because I have a lot of work to do. And I am not dying today. Today is the day I start living for her." I looked back at the ruined house. It was no longer just a shelter. It was my war room. And I was going to war. I sat on the rotting porch steps of my new kingdom, staring at the grease stain on Mick's driveway across the street. The revelation that my truck had been sabotaged did not just break my heart. It rewired my entire brain. For the last 5 years, I had been living in a fog of grief, believing that my beloved Catherine had simply made a mistake, that she had been tired, that her reflexes had failed her. I had blamed myself for letting her drive that night. I had carried the guilt like a stone in my gut. But now, as the wind whipped through the empty window frames of the house, I realized the stone was not guilt. It was evidence. The timeline laid itself out in my mind like a blueprint. 5 years ago, Brandon was in deep trouble with a gambling syndicate in Chicago. I did not know it then, but I knew he was desperate. He had come to us asking for a loan, which we gave him. But it was not enough. Then the accident happened. Catherine died. The life insurance policy paid out double for accidental death. Brandon handled all the paperwork because I was too broken to function. He took a cut, a big cut. He said it was for legal fees and funeral costs, but I never saw the receipts. And then he bought that Porsche. He bought the designer suits. He cleared his debts. He did not just kill her for money. He killed her because she was the one who controlled the finances. I was the builder, she was the accountant. With her gone, I was blind. I was easy to manipulate. And now that he had drained me dry, he had tried to cut the loose end. Mr. Mick came over, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at me with the intensity that demanded action. "Victor, we have to call the cops. We have the truck. We have the cut line. This is attempted murder." I shook my head slowly. "No police. Not yet." Mick looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you kidding me? The guy tried to kill you. And if we call them now, what happens?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "Brandon is a respectable real estate agent. I am a homeless old man squatting in a condemned house. He will say I did it myself to frame him. He will say I am senile. He has lawyers, Mick. He has money. He has the narrative. If I go to the police now, I lose. And if I lose, he gets away with killing Catherine." Mick kicked the dirt, frustration radiating off him. "So what do we do? You just going to let him get away with it?" I stood up. My knees popped, but I did not feel the pain. I felt a cold, hard energy coursing through my veins. It was the same energy I felt when I looked at a pile of lumber and saw a house. "I am going to build a trap, Mick. I am going to build this house. I am going to turn this pile of garbage into the most valuable property in the county. And I am going to use it to bait him. He is greedy. That is his weakness. He thinks I am dead or dying. When he finds out I am sitting on a gold mine, he will come. And when he comes, I will be ready." Mick stared at me for a long moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "You are a scary old man, Victor. I like it. But you cannot do this alone. This place is a disaster. You need muscle. I looked at his shop across the street. I noticed the blue tarp flapping on his roof. I noticed the water stains on his siding. I need muscle, I agreed. And you need a roofer. I saw those buckets in your lobby, Mick. Every time it rains, you are swimming. Mick laughed, a deep belly sound. You got a deal, old-timer. I help you demo and haul. You fix my roof. We shook hands. His grip was like a vice. Mine was like stone. It was a pact made in dirt and oil. The next week was a blur of violence and creation. We attacked the house like it was a living enemy. We started at dawn and worked until we dropped. I channeled every ounce of my rage into the work. Every swing of the sledgehammer was a blow against Brandon. Every rotten board I ripped up was a lie I was exposing. I was 70 years old, but I worked with the ferocity of a man half my age. My body screamed. My muscles ached so bad I could barely lift my arms at night. But I welcomed the pain. It kept me focused. It kept the grief at bay. When I was ripping down drywall, I did not have to think about Catherine's last moments. When I was hauling heavy bags of debris, I did not have to picture her face. Mick was a beast. He could lift beams that would take 3 normal men to move. He brought over his generator so we could run power tools. He brought over food. He never asked for a dime. We ate sandwiches sitting on the floor, surrounded by dust, talking about the war. He had been in the Marines. I had fought my own battles on construction sites. We understood each other. We were men who built things and fixed things. Brandon was a man who destroyed things. The neighbors started to watch. At first, they looked at us with suspicion, then with curiosity. They saw the pile of trash in the driveway growing. They saw the yard getting cleared. They saw the old man and the mechanic working through the rain and the snow. Someone left a casserole on the porch one morning. No note, just food. It was the first act of kindness I had received in months that did not come from Mick. We focused on the structural integrity first. I used my skills to shore up the sagging foundation. I replaced the rotted support beams. I knew this house. I understood its bones. It was built in the 1920s when they used real timber. Oak, chestnut. The skeleton was strong even if the skin was rotten. It just needed someone to believe in it, just like me. One afternoon, about 10 days in, we were working on the main living room. This was the heart of the house. It had a massive fireplace that had been boarded up for decades. The walls were covered in layers of peeling wallpaper and crumbling plaster. I was working on the wall to the left of the fireplace. The plaster there was thick, reinforced with horsehair and wood lath. It was tough work. I swung my hammer, smashing into the wall. Dust exploded into the air, choking me. I swung again and again, hacking away at the rot. I wanted to expose the brick underneath. I wanted to see the truth of the house. Mick was in the other room tearing up the carpet. The sound of his crowbar screeching against nails was the soundtrack to our war. I hit a particularly hard section of the wall. The hammer bounced back, sending a shockwave up my arm. It felt different. It did not feel like wood or brick. It felt like metal. I paused, wiping the sweat and dust from my eyes. I tapped the spot again. Clang. A hollow, metallic sound. "Hey, Mick," I called out. Mick appeared in the doorway, covered in gray dust. "What is it?" "You find a dead rat." "I found something," I said. I used the claw of my hammer to gently pry away the surrounding plaster. Pieces of wall fell away, revealing a dark, rectangular shape. It was not a pipe. It was not a vent. It was a box. I chiseled around it carefully. My heart started to beat faster. In my 40 years of construction, I had found plenty of things in walls. Old newspapers, liquor bottles, a few lost toys. But this was different. This had been placed here with purpose. It was a metal box about the size of a shoebox, rusted shut and wedged between 2 studs. It had been wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, but the cloth had long since disintegrated. "Help me get this out," I said. Mick stepped forward and grabbed one side while I grabbed the other. We pulled. It was stuck tight, fused to the wood by years of moisture and rust. On three, Mick grunted. 1, 2, 3. We yanked. With a screech of tearing metal, the box came free, tumbling out of the wall and crashing onto the floor. A cloud of ancient dust puffed up around it. We stood there looking at it. It looked like a coffin for secrets. "What do you think is in there?" Mick asked, his voice hushed. "I don't know," I said, kneeling down beside it. I reached out and touched the cold, rusted metal. I felt a strange vibration in my fingertips. My intuition. The gut feeling that had kept me alive in this business for decades was screaming at me. This was not just trash. This was the leverage I had been praying for. This was the weapon I needed. "Hand me the pry bar," I whispered. Mick handed me the tool. I jammed the flat end under the lid of the box. I leaned my weight into it. The metal groaned, protesting the intrusion after who knows how many years. I pushed harder. The rust gave way with a loud snap. The lid flew open. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness of the box. Mick leaned in over my shoulder, and what we saw inside made us both gasp. It was not gold. It was not jewelry. It was paper, bundles of it. But it was not money. It was something much more valuable. I reached in and pulled out the first document. My hands were trembling, but this time it was not from the cold or the rage. It was from the sheer impossible weight of destiny. I looked at Mick, and for the first time in 5 years, a genuine smile cracked my face. "Mick," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "get the generator. We are going to work all night." Because what I held in my hand was the key to my resurrection, and the key to Brandon's destruction. The generator hummed in the background, a steady mechanical heartbeat that masked the sound of my own ragged breathing. I reached into the metal box and pulled out a heavy cloth sack. It clinked with the distinct heavy sound of silver striking silver. I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto the dusty floor. Dozens of silver dollars spilled out, catching the harsh light of our work lamp. They were Morgan silver dollars, dating back to the late 19th century. Their faces were worn, but the silver was real and solid. Beneath the coins were stacks of paper bound in brittle rubber bands that snapped as soon as I touched them. These were municipal bearer bonds from the 1960s. I had heard of these things but never seen them. Back in the day, they were as good as cash. Whoever held the paper owned the money. No names, no digital trail. Just cold, hard value hidden in a wall by a man who clearly did not trust banks any more than I did now. Mick let out a low whistle, picking up a coin and biting it gently, like they did in old cowboy movies. "This is the real deal, Victor," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "You are not just squatting anymore. You are funded." We took the haul to a coin dealer in downtown Gary the next morning, a friend of Mick who asked no questions and paid in cash. Between the silver and the bonds, we walked out with $42,000. It was not a fortune. It was not enough to retire on. But for a man who had started the week with $15 and a broken heart, it was a war chest. I sat in the truck with the envelope of cash on my lap. Mick looked at me, expecting me to say I was going to buy a new truck or maybe rent a decent apartment. But I had a different plan. I looked at the cash and I did not see comfort. I saw lumber. I saw drywall. I saw high-end fixtures. I saw the trap. "Mick," I said, staring at the envelope, "take me to the supply yard. The expensive one." "We are not going to Home Depot?" Mick asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," I said. "We are going to the place where the custom builders go. If I am going to catch a rat, I need the best cheese money can buy." For the next 3 weeks, I spent every dime of that money on the house. I did not buy myself a steak dinner. I did not buy a hotel room. I slept on a mattress on the subfloor, breathing in sawdust and paint fumes. I ate sandwiches from the gas station. Every single dollar went into the materials. I bought quarter-sawn oak for the floors. I bought Italian marble for the countertops. I bought vintage copper fixtures that cost more than my first car. I worked like a man possessed. I used every trick I had learned in 40 years of contracting. I installed crown molding with seamless joints. I restored the original staircase, sanding the wood until it glowed like honey. I rewired the entire house, bringing it up to code and beyond. Mick was right there beside me, hauling and hammering, sweating through his coveralls. We turned that rotting carcass of a house into a jewelry box. It was beautiful. It was the best work of my life. And it was all a lie. I was not building a home. I was building a stage set. I was building a shiny object to dangle in front of a greedy child. But building the trap was only half the battle. I need to know the enemy. I needed to know why. Why now? Why the rush? Why the cruelty? I need eyes on him, Mick, I said one evening as we were installing the kitchen cabinets. I need to know what Brandon is doing. I need to know who he talks to. Mick nodded, wiping grout off his hands. I know a guy. His name is Ray. He used to be a detective in Chicago until he had a disagreement with a superior and a bottle of whiskey. He is rough around the edges, but he is cheap and he hates bullies. Ray was exactly as Mick described. He met us at the house driving a beat-up sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes. He listened to my story without blinking. When I told him about the brake line, his eyes narrowed. He did not offer sympathy. He just asked for the license plate number and a picture of Brandon. I paid him $2,000 from the fund. Find out everything I said. Find out where the money went. Find out why he needed to sell my house so bad. Ray disappeared for 5 days. Those were the longest 5 days of my life. I kept working, focusing on the details, polishing the floors until I could see my own reflection. I saw an old man in the reflection, but I did not see a victim anymore. I saw a hunter. On the 5th day, Ray came back. He walked into the house, stepping carefully on the new hardwood floors. He looked around, impressed despite himself. Nice place, he grunted. You looking to sell? Not yet, I said. What did you find? Ray pulled a manila folder from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the marble island I had just installed. It landed with a slap that echoed in the empty kitchen. Your son is not just a bad seed, Victor Ray said. He is a drowning man, and he is pulling everyone down with him. I opened the folder. Inside were photos. Photos of Brandon entering a nondescript building in the industrial district of Chicago at odd hours. Photos of him arguing with men who looked like they broke legs for a living. And then there were the financial records. Ray had a source at the bank. He owes $500,000 to a loan shark operation run by the Albanian mob, Ray said, his voice flat. He made some bad bets on futures. Then he tried to cover it with sports betting. He dug a hole so deep he cannot see the sky. I felt a cold sickness in my stomach. 500,000. That was the number. The interest is killing him, Ray continued. They gave him a deadline, end of the month, or he pays with his kneecaps. Or worse. That is why he needed your assets. He liquidated everything he could get his hands on with that power of attorney. But it was not enough. I looked at the dates on the gambling debts. They went back years. They started small right around the time Catherine died. He killed her for the insurance money, I whispered. To pay off the first debt. Ray nodded grimly. It fits. The timing lines up perfectly. He paid off $100,000 5 years ago, right after the policy settled. But he did not stop gambling. He never stops. And now he is desperate again. I closed the folder. My hand was resting on the picture of Brandon arguing with a thug. My son. the boy I had taught to ride a bike. He was not just a murderer. He was a degenerate gambler who had traded his mother's life for a few more months at the tables. "There is one more thing," Ray said, "and you are not going to like it." What I asked, bracing myself. "He is listing your house in Chicago," Ray said. "The big one. The one you built. It went up on the MLS this morning. Fire sale price. He is asking 30% below market value because he needs cash in hand by Friday. He is selling your legacy for pennies on the dollar to save his own skin." I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it made my vision blur. My house. The house where I raised him. The house where Catherine's ghost still walked. He was selling it to strangers. He was going to let them walk through our memories and buy them at a discount. "No," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "He does not get to do that." "He has the deed," Victor Ray reminded me gently. "You signed it." "I know what I signed," I snapped. "But he is not going to sell it to a stranger." I looked around the kitchen I had just finished. The trap was ready. The bait was polished and shining. "Ray," I said, pulling out another stack of cash from my pocket, "I have a job for you. I need you to make a call. I need you to be a wealthy investor looking for a quick buy, but not for the Chicago house." Ray looked at me confused. "Then what am I buying?" I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "You are going to call Brandon. You are going to tell him you heard rumors about a historic restoration in Gary, Indiana. A hidden gem that is about to hit the market. You are going to tell him that there is an eccentric old owner who is looking to sell cheap because he is moving to Florida." "You want me to lure him here?" Ray asked. "I want him to see what he threw away," I said. "I want him to smell the money. He is desperate, Ray. He needs $500,000. If he thinks he can flip this place, if he thinks he can con his old man one last time, he will come running. He won't be able to help himself." Ray grinned, showing a gold tooth. "You are a cold bastard, Victor. I learned from the best," I said, looking at the photo of my son. "Make the call, Ray. Tell him the water is warm." As Ray walked out to make the call, I stood in the center of my beautiful empty house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I could almost hear the trap snapping shut. Brandon was running out of time, and I was just getting started. He wanted to sell a house. Fine. I would give him a house to sell, but the price was going to be higher than he could ever afford. The house was no longer a rotting corpse on a forgotten street. It was a beacon. The fresh coat of cream-colored paint gleamed under the streetlights, and the new copper gutters caught the morning sun like veins of fire. We had transformed the ruin into the finest property in Gary, but it was not built for a family. It was built for a predator. I knew that a house like this in a neighborhood like this would talk. It would whisper to the neighbors and shout to the passers-by. But I needed it to scream. I needed the news to travel 30 miles north to the high-rise condos and desperate back rooms of Chicago. Mick was the perfect town crier. He started talking at his shop. He told his customers while he changed their oil. He told the parts delivery drivers. He spun a tale that was simple and irresistible. He said that crazy old man Halloway had found something in the walls. He did not say what. He just winked and said that the renovations were being paid for in cash. Old money. He said I was looking to flip it and move to Florida to live out my days on a beach. Rumors are like wildfire. They consume the truth and leave behind a charred, exaggerated version of reality. By the time the story reached the local real estate circles, I was not just a guy who found some coins. I was the eccentric millionaire sitting on a hidden fortune. Ray, my private investigator, did the rest. He played the part of the shady investor perfectly. He made a few calls to Brandon's real estate firm asking about the property on Jackson Street. He dropped hints that he had heard the owner was looking to sell off market for a quick deal. He planted the seed that the property was worth triple what it appeared. Now we just had to wait. I spent the days sitting in the living room on a single folding chair. The house was empty of furniture, but full of potential violence. I stared at the phone sitting on the marble kitchen island. I willed it to ring. I knew Brandon's situation was critical. Ray had told me the loan sharks had given him a 48-hour extension. He was desperate. He was terrified. And a terrified man does not think clearly. He grabs at the first lifeline he sees, even if that lifeline is attached to a hook. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The sun was going down, casting long orange shadows across the hardwood floors I had sanded with my own hands. The air in the house was still smelling of sawdust and fresh paint. Mick was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, drinking a soda. Then the phone rang. The sound was sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence like a knife. It echoed off the high ceilings. I looked at Mick. He nodded slowly, setting his drink down. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes for a second, summoning the ghost of the man I used to be. The gentle father. The trusting husband. The confused old man they thought they had discarded. I needed to become him one last time. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" I said, my voice raspy and deliberate. "Dad." The voice on the other end was familiar, but the tone was wrong. It was not the cold dismissal of the night in the snow. It was warm. It was trembling with performative emotion. It was the voice of a dutiful son. "Dad, is that you? Oh, thank God. We have been so worried." I held the phone away from my ear for a second, fighting the urge to vomit. Worried. They had kicked me out with $15 in a blizzard. They had hoped I would freeze. "Who is this?" I asked, feigning confusion. "It is Brandon, Dad. Your son. We have been looking everywhere for you. The police said you drove off. We thought something happened to you. Where are you?" I looked at Mick and smirked, but I kept my voice shaky. "I am in Gary's son, at the old house, the one I bought years ago." I did not know where else to go. Gary, Brandon said, and I could hear the gears turning in his head. I could hear him signaling to someone, probably Tiffany. "Dad, that place is a dump. It is not safe. You need to come home." "It is not a dump anymore," I said, letting a hint of pride seep into my voice. "I fixed it up. I found some money, Brandon. Old money. In the walls. I made it nice. It is a palace now." There was a silence on the other end. A greedy, hungry silence. He had heard the word money. "You found money?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "How much money, Dad?" "Enough," I said. "Enough to fix everything. Enough to make the house shine." "But I am tired, Brandon. I am so tired." This was the hook. I had to sell the frailty. I had to make him believe that I was a sitting duck guarding a pile of gold. "Dad, listen to me," Brandon said, his voice speeding up. "You do not sound good. You sound exhausted. You should not be there alone with valuables. It is dangerous. Tiffany and I want to come get you. We want to bring you home. We made a mistake, Dad. We were just stressed. We love you." I closed my eyes. The words "we love you" felt like poison in my ear. He loved the money. He loved the idea of saving his own skin. "I don't know," I said, hesitating. "You were so angry." "I was not angry at you, Dad," Brandon pleaded. "I was scared. I was scared for your health. And now, knowing you are in that city alone, I am terrified. Please let us come see you. Let us make it right." I let the silence hang there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let him sweat. I let him imagine the loan sharks knocking on his door. I let him imagine the fortune I was supposedly sitting on. "Okay," I whispered. "You can come." "Really?" Brandon breathed out. "Okay. Good. We are coming right now. We will be there in an hour. Brandon, I said, interrupting him. Yes, Dad. Bring Tiffany, I said. I want the whole family together. I have been thinking a lot. About the future. About the will. The will. The magic words. Of course, Dad, he said. Tiffany is right here. We are both coming. We just want you to be safe. I know, son. I said, my voice cracking with fake emotion. I know. Drive safe. I hung up the phone. The silence rushed back into the room, but the tension was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I looked at Mick. He was staring at me, a look of dark admiration on his face. He bought it, Mick asked. He bought it, I said, straightening my back and dropping the act. My voice was no longer raspy. It was strong. It was the voice of the man who was about to bring the hammer down. He is bringing her too, Mick asked. He is bringing her, I confirmed. He thinks he is coming to collect an inheritance. He thinks he is coming to convince a senile old man to sign over a renovated mansion so he can pay off his debts and bury me in a nursing home. I walked over to the fireplace, the beautiful new fireplace with the custom mantel. I ran my hand along the smooth wood. Get the papers, Mick, I said, and get the sledgehammer. Mick stood up. You going to tell him the truth when he walks in? No, I said, staring at the wall where I had hidden the real evidence. The evidence Ray had dug up. The medical records, the falsified mechanic reports, and the little notebook I had found in the glove box of my truck a week ago, tucked behind the manual. A notebook Catherine used to keep. I am not going to tell him anything, I said. I am going to show him. I am going to let him think he has won. I am going to let him sign the papers. I am going to let him drink the champagne. And then I asked Mick to check the camera I had hidden in the crown molding. And then I said, I am going to open the walls. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun had set. The streetlights were flickering on. In an hour, my son would be here. My son, the murderer. My son, the thief. He was coming for my money. But he was going to be on something else entirely. He was going to find a father who had finally learned how to say no. I checked my watch. The game was over. The execution was about to begin. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who should have protected you, hit the like button. Because what happens next is for every parent who was ever treated like a burden. I turned off the lights in the kitchen, leaving only a single lamp burning in the living room. The stage was set. The actors were en route. I sat down in the chair and waited for the sound of a Porsche engine. I waited for the sound of my past coming to die. The headlights of the Porsche cut through the gloom of Jackson Street like laser beams. I watched from the living room window as the sleek black machine navigated the potholes I knew by heart. It looked alien here, a spaceship that had crash-landed on a forgotten planet. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh paint and varnish, the smells of my hard work and my deception. I let my shoulders slump. I let my jaw go slack. I dimmed the light in my eyes. It was time to put on the performance of a lifetime. When the doorbell rang, it was a melodious chime I had installed myself, not the harsh buzzer that used to be there. I waited a few beats, shuffling my feet on the hardwood floor, creating the sound of an old man moving with difficulty. I opened the door. The look on their faces was worth every penny I had spent. Brandon and Tiffany stood on the porch, frozen. They were expecting a ruin. They were expecting the rotting carcass of a house they had left me to die in. Instead, they were staring at a restored Victorian masterpiece. The porch light caught the sparkle of Tiffany's diamond earrings, but her eyes shone brighter when she saw the mahogany door and the brass fixtures. Dad. Brandon breathed the word out. He was not looking at me. He was looking past me at the foyer where the crystal chandelier I had bought from an estate sale hung like a glittering crown. He was looking at the quarter-sawn oak floors that glowed under the warm light. He was calculating. I could see the numbers scrolling behind his eyes. I blinked, squinting at them, as if the light hurt my eyes. "Brandon, is that you?" "Oh, Dad." Tiffany pushed past Brandon and threw her arms around me. She smelled of expensive perfume, the kind that costs more than a week of groceries. Her embrace was tight, suffocating, and entirely fake. I felt her body tense against mine. She did not want to touch me. I was the man she had called a burden. I was the man she had kicked out into the snow. But now I was the owner of a mansion, and she was hugging me like I was her favorite person in the world. "We were so worried about you," she sobbed into my shoulder. Her tears were dry, but her voice was wet with performed grief. "We drove up and down every street. We thought we lost you." I patted her back awkwardly, my hand trembling just enough to sell the act. "I am okay," I said, my voice thin and raspy. I needed to come here. To think." Brandon stepped inside, closing the door behind him to shut out the cold and the sight of the neighborhood. He looked around the living room, his mouth slightly open. "Dad," he said, walking over to the fireplace, running his hand along the custom mantel I had carved. "You did all this. In 3 weeks. I had some help," I said, shuffling over to the armchair. "I found some things in the walls, Brandon. Old things. Valuable things. I hired a crew. They worked fast." "How valuable?" Brandon asked, turning to me sharply. The concern for my health had vanished, replaced instantly by the hunger for the asset. I waved my hand dismissively. "Enough. Enough to fix the roof. Enough to put in the marble. I just wanted it to be nice. I wanted to leave something behind." I sank into the chair, letting out a groan of pain that was only half fake. My body was wrecked from the labor, but I could not let them know that I was strong. I had to be the broken old horse ready for the glue factory. Tiffany sat on the arm of my chair, taking my calloused hand in her manicured ones. "Dad, we are so sorry about that night. It was the stress. The market has been terrible, and with the baby coming, we just snapped. We did not mean it. We love you so much." "Baby?" I asked, widening my eyes. "We are trying," she lied smoothly. "And the stress of it all. It just made us crazy. But seeing you here alone in this neighborhood. It is not safe, Dad. You have done a miracle with this place, but you cannot live here." I looked down at my hands. "I know," I whispered. "I am tired, Tiffany. I am so tired. The house is too big. I just wanted to prove I could do it. But now, I do not know what to do." Brandon was already moving. He was pacing the room, looking at the crown molding, checking the windows. He was appraising the flip. "Dad." "Listen to me," Brandon said, kneeling in front of me. "You do not have to worry about anything anymore. We are here. We can help you manage this. This house, it is a great asset. But it is a lot of work. You should be resting. You should be somewhere comfortable with meals cooked for you and doctors nearby." "You mean a home?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. "A community," Tiffany corrected quickly, squeezing my hand. "A luxury community. With people your own age. We can afford the best one now, Dad. Especially if we manage your assets together." I looked from one to the other. The sharks were circling. They smelled blood in the water. "I suppose," I said slowly. "I suppose you are right. My memory, it is not what it used to be. I forget things. I forget where I put my tools. Maybe I am not safe alone." Brandon nodded vigorously. "Exactly, Dad. That is why we are here, to protect you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I recognized the legal paper immediately. It was a new will, and probably a new power of attorney. He had brought it with him. He had been so sure he could talk me into it. I just happened to have this drafted. Brandon said, his voice casual. It just simplifies things. It puts everything in a trust that I manage for you. The Chicago house, this house, the accounts. It means you never have to worry about a bill again. You just sign and we take care of the rest. I stared at the paper. It was my death warrant. It was the document that would strip me of everything I had left. I reached out and took the pen he offered. My hand shook violently. I let the pen hover over the signature line. Brandon held his breath. Tiffany leaned in, her eyes wide. I stopped. I lowered the pen. There is one thing, I said, looking up at Brandon. Anything, Dad. Anything. I need to go back to the house in Chicago, I said. One last time. Brandon frowned. Why? We can bring you anything you need. No, I said stubbornly. You cannot find it. It is your mother's locket, the one she wore on our wedding day. I hid it. I hid it somewhere safe because I was afraid I would lose it. I need to get it. I cannot go to the community without it. Brandon and Tiffany exchanged a look. They were annoyed. They wanted to sign the papers, grab the keys, and leave me here to rot. But they were too close to say no. Okay, Dad, Brandon said, forcing a smile. We can go. We can go right now. We will drive you there. You can get the locket, and then we can sign the papers there. Then we will take you to a hotel for the night. A nice one. I nodded slowly. Okay. Okay, let me just use the restroom first. And get my coat. Take your time, Dad, Tiffany said, patting my shoulder. We will be right here. I stood up, groaning, and shuffled toward the hallway. I walked past the kitchen and into the small powder room I had renovated under the stairs. I closed the door and locked it, but I did not use the toilet. I stood perfectly still. The powder room shared a wall with the living room. When I had rebuilt this wall last week, I had intentionally left out the insulation put between these two studs. I had covered it with drywall and wallpaper, but acoustically it was thin. I wanted to hear. I needed to hear. I leaned my ear against the floral wallpaper. Can you believe this place? Brandon's voice came through, muffled but clear. He must have put 50 grand into this dump, maybe more. The floors alone are worth 10. How much do you think we can get for it? Tiffany asked, her voice sharp and greedy. In this market, Brandon replied, laughing softly. If we market it as a historic restoration, maybe 300. Maybe 350 to a hipster from Chicago. Plus the Chicago house sale. Babe, we are clear. We pay off the Albanians and we still have enough for the trip to Cabo. Thank God, Tiffany sighed. I could not take another day of dodging calls. But what about him? He is going to be a nuisance. He wants to keep the locket. He is going to want to visit. Brandon snorted. Once he signs those papers, he is going nowhere. I know a place in Cicero. It is state-funded. It smells like boiled cabbage and urine, but it is secure. We drop him off, we tell them he is a flight risk, and we block his number. He won't last 6 months. That is cruel, babe. Tiffany giggled. It is necessary, Brandon said, his voice cold. He is a liability. He killed Mom with his incompetence, and now he is draining our inheritance. I am doing him a favor. At least he will have a bed. I stood in the bathroom, and I felt the last devastating piece of my heart turn to stone. He blamed me. He actually convinced himself that I was the incompetent one. He had sabotaged the truck, killed his own mother to pay a gambling debt, and now he was justifying burying me in a hellhole in Cicero so he could go to Cabo. I looked at my face in the mirror. I did not see the confused old man anymore. I saw a soldier. I saw a judge. I saw the executioner. You are right, Brandon, I whispered to my reflection. It is necessary. I flushed the toilet to make noise. I turned on the faucet and let the cold water run over my wrists. I dried my hands on the plush towel I had bought for this specific moment. I opened the door and shuffled back out into the living room. They were standing by the fireplace, looking like the perfect, loving couple. Ready, Dad? Brandon asked, smiling that shark smile. I am ready, son, I said, buttoning my old coat. Let's go home. I walked past them toward the door. I did not look back at my beautiful house. I knew I would be back. But Brandon, he was leaving this house for the last time. He just did not know it yet. We walked out into the cold night air. The Porsche beeped as Brandon unlocked it. I climbed into the back seat. The leather was soft and supple. It smelled of money. I sat in the dark watching the back of my son's head. You know, Dad, Brandon said as he pulled out of the driveway, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I am really glad you called. This is going to be a new beginning for all of us. I clenched my hands in my lap, digging my fingernails into my palms until it hurt. I looked at the dark street rolling by. Yes, Brandon, I said softly. A new beginning. But in my head, I finished the sentence. You will not have the chance to dump me in a hole, son, because tonight I am going to bury you, not with a shovel, but with the truth. I leaned back and closed my eyes as the car sped toward the highway toward Chicago, toward the wall where the secrets were waiting to scream. I was the actor in their play, but they did not know that the script had already been rewritten, and the final act was going to be a tragedy for them. The drive to Chicago was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat in the back seat watching the city lights blur past my reflection in the window. Brandon drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. Tiffany was texting furiously, probably updating her friends that their payday was imminent. They thought they were driving a senile old man to his doom. They did not know I had already made the calls. We pulled into the driveway of the house I built. Seeing it again was like a physical punch to the gut. The lawn was overgrown. The shutters were closed. It looked like a house that was holding its breath. But there were two other cars parked in the driveway. A sturdy, nondescript sedan and a police cruiser. Brandon slammed on the brakes. Who is that, Dad? Why are the police here? I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm and confused. Oh, I invited them, son. That is Mr. Henderson, my old lawyer, and Chief Miller. You remember Miller, right? We play poker on Tuesdays. Why are they here? Brandon demanded, turning around to look at me, his face pale. For the signing, I said innocently. You said this was legal, right? Official. I wanted witnesses. I want everyone to know that I am giving this to you of my own free will. Plus, Miller wanted to say hello. He has not seen me in months. Brandon looked at Tiffany. Panic flickered in his eyes. This was not part of his plan. He wanted a quiet signature in a dark room, not a public ceremony with law enforcement. It is fine, babe, Tiffany whispered, touching his arm. It makes it more legit. If the police chief witnesses it, nobody can contest it later. It is actually better for us. Brandon took a deep breath. You are right. Okay, let's get this over with. We got out of the car. The wind was biting just like the night I left, but this time I was not shivering. Mr. Henderson and Chief Miller were waiting on the porch. Henderson held a briefcase tight against his chest. Miller stood tall, his badge glinting under the porch light. They did not smile. They nodded at me, a subtle acknowledgement of the plan we had discussed. Mr. Halloway, Brandon said, forcing a charming smile as he walked up the steps. Chief Miller, what a surprise. Dad did not tell us you were coming. Your father wanted to make sure everything was done by the book, Brandon Henderson said, his voice dry and professional. Given the size of the estate transfer, it is prudent to have legal oversight. Of course, Brandon said, unlocking the front door. We have nothing to hide. We just want what is best for Dad. We walked inside. The house smelled stale. It smelled of neglect. My heart ached seeing the dust on the banister I had sanded by hand. We moved into the living room, the large open space with the vaulted ceilings and the massive stone fireplace that was the centerpiece of the home. I walked slowly, running my hand along the back of my favorite armchair. It was still there, exactly where I left it. Can we just sign the papers? Dad, Brandon asked, pulling the documents out of his jacket again. He laid them on the coffee table. Henderson and Miller are here. Let's just do it so you can rest. I ignored him. I walked over to the bookshelf. I picked up a small wooden bird I had carved for Catherine on our 10th anniversary. You remember this, Brandon? I asked, turning the bird over in my hands. I made this from the scrap wood of the first house I ever framed. Your mother loved it. She said it was the only bird that never flew away. That is great, Dad, Brandon said, tapping his foot. Really touching. But we are on a schedule. I put the bird down. I walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where I had built a treehouse for him. A treehouse he never climbed because he was afraid of heights. And that treehouse, I said, pointing. Do you remember when I built that? I fell off the ladder and broke my ankle, but I finished it. Because you asked for it. Brandon sighed, loud and exasperated. Dad, please. The past is the past. We are talking about your future. Sign the papers. I turned to look at him. He was vibrating with impatience. He did not care about the bird. He did not care about the treehouse. He saw this house as a check to be cashed. I walked toward the fireplace. The stone was cold to the touch. This was my masterpiece. I had laid every stone myself, selecting them for their shape and color. It was built to last 100 years. I stood in front of the hearth, my back to the room. I could feel their eyes on me. Brandon's greed, Tiffany's annoyance, Miller's watchful gaze, Henderson's legal scrutiny. You know, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the tremble, losing the frailty. There is a reason I built this fireplace so wide. Catherine always wanted a warm heart for the home. She said the fire was where the truth lived. Dad. What are you talking about? Brandon snapped. Just sign the damn paper. I turned around slowly. I stood tall. My shoulders went back. The confused old man evaporated, leaving only Victor Halloway, the man who built things to last. I am not signing anything, Brandon. I said, my voice clear and strong. The room went dead silent. Brandon blinked, confused by the sudden change in my demeanor. What, he asked. I said, I am not signing, I repeated, because this house does not belong to you, and it never will. Brandon laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Dad, you are having an episode. Mr. Henderson, explain it to him. He already signed the deed 6 months ago. The house is legally mine. Henderson stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a file. Actually, Brandon, that deed was signed under false pretenses. And more importantly, it was signed while your father was under the influence of heavy pain medication post-surgery. We have the medical records to prove he was not of sound mind. That makes the transfer contestable. Brandon's face turned red. That is bullshit. He knew exactly what he was doing. Did I asked, stepping closer to him. Did I know you were going to sell it to pay off a gambling debt to the Albanian mob? Brandon froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How do you know about that? He whispered. I know everything, son, I said. I know about the 500,000. I know about the loan sharks. I know about the fire sale you posted this morning. And I know why you are really here. You are not here to save me. You are here to bury me. so you can save yourself. Brandon's eyes darted around the room. He looked at Miller. The chief was not smiling. His hand was resting near his belt. "This is a setup," Brandon hissed. "You set me up, you crazy old bastard." "I did," I admitted. "But before I kick you out of my house forever, there is one more thing I need to show you. Something I should have looked at 5 years ago." I turned back to the fireplace. I pointed to the wall directly to the right of the stone hearth. It was a smooth expanse of drywall painted a soft cream color. "You remember when you insisted on helping me renovate this room 5 years ago?" I asked. "Right after Mom died. You were so eager to help. You said you wanted to keep busy. You put up this drywall yourself." "So what?" Brandon spat. "I helped you." "You did," I said. "You were very helpful. But you were not a very good carpenter's son. You left a hollow sound, and you were so anxious to finish. You worked all night. I always wondered why." I walked over to the corner where I had leaned a heavy sledgehammer earlier when I arrived with Miller. I picked it up. The weight of it felt familiar and righteous in my hands. "Dad, put that down," Brandon shouted, stepping forward. Miller stepped in his path, his chest broad and immovable. "Stay back, son. Let the man speak." I hefted the hammer. "You see, Brandon," I said, looking at him over my shoulder. "Walls have ears, and sometimes they have stomachs. They swallow things we try to hide. But the thing about houses I build is that they don't keep secrets from me." I swung the hammer. With a deafening crash, the metal head smashed into the drywall. Dust exploded. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Tiffany screamed. I pulled the hammer back and swung again, and again. I was tearing down the lies. I was ripping open the wound. The drywall crumbled, revealing the dark space between the studs. And there, sitting on the bottom plate, just where I knew it would be, was a black plastic trash bag. It was dusty and covered in cobwebs, but it was unmistakable. I dropped the hammer. The thud shook the floor. I reached into the hole and pulled out the bag. Brandon let out a sound that was not human. It was the sound of a trapped animal, knowing the cage door has just slammed shut. "No," he screamed, lunging forward. Miller grabbed him, slamming him onto the coffee table. Henderson stepped back, protecting his briefcase. I ripped the bag open. Inside were pill bottles, dozens of them, and a notebook. I held up one of the bottles. "Heart medication," I said, reading the label. "Mom's heart medication." "But look at the date, Brandon. These were filled 3 days before she died, and they are full." I looked at him lying pinned on the table, his face pressed against the wood. "If these are full," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that threatened to consume me, "then what was she taking that day? What did you switch them with, Brandon?" I threw the bottle at him. It bounced off his shoulder. "And this notebook," I said, holding up the small leather diary. "This is hers. She wrote in it every day. The last entry. Do you want to know what it says?" I opened the book to the bookmark. It says Brandon asked for money again. I told him no. He looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "I am afraid." I closed the book. The room was spinning. "She was afraid of you," I whispered, "and she was right." I looked at Chief Miller. "Read him his rights, Chief," I said, turning away because I could not bear to look at the monster I had raised anymore. "Get him out of my house." As Miller began to recite the Miranda rights, Brandon started to sob. Not tears of remorse, tears of a man who realized the game was over. But I was not done. The wall was open. The truth was out. And the house, my house, finally felt clean. The sound of the sledgehammer hitting the wall was not just the sound of destruction. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. I watched the dust settle in the silence that followed. A jagged hole now gaped in the pristine cream-colored drywall like an open wound. Brandon stared at it, his face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Tiffany had her hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the hole, as if she expected a monster to crawl out. In a way, a monster did come out, but it was not a creature of scales and teeth. It was a monster made of plastic and paper. I reached into the dark cavity between the studs. My fingers brushed against the cold, thick plastic of a heavy-duty trash bag. It had been sitting there in the dark for 5 years, waiting for this moment. I pulled it out. The bag was covered in a fine layer of white gypsum dust. I dropped it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound made Brandon flinch as if I had hit him. "What is that?" Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. "This," I said, untying the knot at the top of the bag, my hands steady and deliberate, "is the truth." I reached inside and pulled out the first item. It was a clear plastic prescription bottle. The label was faded but still legible. Digoxin. Catherine Halloway. I held it up to the light. The orange plastic glowed. "Do you recognize this, Brandon?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Brandon did not answer. He was shaking his eyes, locked on the bottle. "This is your mother's heart medication," I continued. "Or at least that is what the label says. She took this every morning. She trusted it to keep her heart beating. But look inside." I popped the cap off. I poured a few of the pills into my palm. They were small, white, and round. "These are not digoxin," I said, showing them to Chief Miller, who had stepped closer, his face grim. "Digoxin pills are often yellow or have specific markings. These are just aspirin, cheap generic aspirin." I looked at Brandon. "You switched them," I said. "You emptied her life-saving medication and replaced it with something useless. You let her walk around with a ticking time bomb in her chest. And when she got behind the wheel of a truck with cut brake lines, she didn't stand a chance. Her heart gave out before she even hit the tree, didn't it? That is why there were no skid marks. She was already gone." "That is a lie," Brandon screamed, his voice cracking. "You are making this up. You planted that." "Did I?" asked. I reached into the bag again. I pulled out a small black ledger. It was worn at the corners. "And did I plant this too?" I asked, opening the book. "This is your handwriting, Brandon. I know it better than my own. I taught you how to write your name." I flipped through the pages. April 10th. 5,000 to Sal. May 1st. 10,000 on the Bulls. May 15th. Need 20,000 by Friday or they break my legs. I looked up at him. May 20th, I read the date aloud. The day your mother died. Paid in full. Insurance pending. The room was so quiet I could hear the wind howling outside. "You wrote this down," I said, closing the book. "You kept a record of your sins. And you hid it here because you thought this was the one place I would never look. You thought I was too stupid, too trusting, to ever tear down a wall you built. But I saw you," I said, stepping closer to him. 5 years ago. I came downstairs for a glass of water at 2 in the morning. I saw you patching this wall. You told me you had accidentally put a hole in it moving furniture. You were sweating. You were shaking. I wanted to believe you. I wanted to believe my son was just clumsy. So I went back to bed. I let myself be blind because the alternative was too terrible to imagine. I paused, letting the weight of my cowardice hang in the air. "But I am not blind anymore," I whispered. "I see you, Brandon. I see exactly what you are." Tiffany let out a sob and collapsed onto the sofa. "Oh my God," she wailed. "Oh my God, Brandon, what did you do?" "Shut up," Brandon hissed at her with his eyes wild. "Shut up. He is lying. It is all circumstantial. That book proves nothing. It proves motive." Henderson said, speaking up for the first time. His voice was calm, cold, and legal. "It establishes a clear timeline of financial desperation coinciding with the suspicious death of the insured party, combined with the tampered medication found in your possession, or rather, in a wall you admit to repairing. It is more than enough for an indictment. Brandon looked at Henderson, then at Miller. He looked at the door. I could see the impulse to run firing in his muscles. "Don't even think about it, son," Miller said, resting his hand on his taser. Brandon looked back at me. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You old fool," he spat. "You should have just died. You should have just frozen in that parking lot. Why couldn't you just die?" "Because I had work to do," I said. Brandon lunged. It was a desperate, pathetic move. He reached for the ledger on the table, hoping to destroy the evidence. But he never made it. Mick, who had been standing quietly in the hallway shadows, stepped forward. He moved with a speed that belied his size. He grabbed Brandon by the back of his expensive cashmere coat and slammed him face first into the wall, the same wall Brandon had used to hide his secrets. "Stay down," Mick growled, twisting Brandon's arm behind his back. Chief Miller was there in a second. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs. "Brandon Halloway." Miller said, his voice booming in the small room. "You are under arrest for the murder of Catherine Halloway, attempted murder of Victor Halloway, and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Brandon was screaming now, incoherent rage and fear. "My arm! You are breaking my arm! Tiffany, call a lawyer! Do something!" Tiffany did not move. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, rocking back and forth, crying. She knew it was over. I watched as Miller hauled my son to his feet. Brandon looked at me. His hair was messed up, his face red, his eyes wet. He looked like the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But I felt no pity. I had spent all my pity. "Dad," he pleaded, his voice suddenly small. "Dad, please. Do not let them take me. I can explain. It was an accident. I did not mean for her to die. I just needed the money. I would have paid it back." I walked up to him and I looked him dead in the eye. "You sold your mother for a bet," I said. "You tried to kill me for a house." I reached out and gently took the bird carving from the shelf, the one I had tried to show him earlier. "You are not my son," I said softly. "My son died a long time ago. You are just a stranger who broke into my house." I turned my back on him. "Get him out of here, Chief," I said. I heard the heavy footsteps as they dragged him out. I heard the front door open and close. I heard the siren wail briefly as they put him in the car. I stood alone in the center of the living room. The hole in the wall stared back at me. It was ugly. It was jagged. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Because for the first time in 5 years, the house wasn't hiding anything. I looked at Tiffany. She was still sobbing on the couch. "You should go," I said, not looking at her. "The police will want to talk to you, and I have a lot of cleaning up to do." She got up and ran out the door without a word, leaving her purse behind. I was finally alone. I sat down in my armchair. I felt exhausted, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. But under the exhaustion, there was peace. I looked at the hole in the wall. I would have to fix that. I would have to mix new plaster. I would have to sand it and paint it. It would take time. But I had time. I had my house back. I had my dignity back. And somewhere in the quiet of the room, I felt Catherine. She wasn't angry anymore. She was resting. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the sound of justice. And it was sweet. The weeks that followed Brandon's arrest were a blur of depositions and courtrooms. The justice system is usually a slow, grinding machine, but when you hand them a confession wrapped in a plastic bag along with a murder weapon disguised as a pill bottle, the gears turn a little faster. I sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day. I wore my best suit, the one Catherine had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I sat straight. I did not look away. I owed it to her to be the witness she never got to be. Brandon tried to fight it, of course. He hired expensive lawyers with money he did not have, lawyers who eventually quit when they realized the checks were bouncing. He tried to plead insanity. He tried to say I was the one who was abusive, that I had manipulated him into a corner. But the evidence was a mountain of stone that he could not climb over. The ledger was damning. The forensic analysis of the pills confirmed they were simple, over-the-counter aspirin. And the mechanic report on the brake lines of my truck, combined with the autopsy review of Catherine's accident, painted a picture of a cold, calculated predator. When the jury read the verdict, Brandon did not cry. He did not scream. He just slumped in his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud. The judge, a stern woman who reminded me a little of Catherine, looked him over her glasses and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She said that a man who would kill the mother who gave him life does not deserve to live among free men. Tiffany tried to cut a deal. She claimed she knew nothing, that she was just a victim of Brandon's lies. But the prosecutor found the emails. She had helped him forge the insurance documents. She had spent the blood money on handbags and vacations knowing exactly where it came from. She got 20 years. When the bailiffs led her away, she looked at me with eyes full of venom. She did not hate me because I had ruined her life. She hated me because I had stopped her from spending the rest of my money. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Chicago afternoon. The air smelled different. It tasted clean. Chief Miller was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. He shook my hand. He did not say anything. He did not have to. We both knew that justice had been served, but it had come at a terrible price. I had lost my wife 5 years ago, but today I had officially lost my son. The difference was that today I chose to let him go. The fallout was financial as well as emotional. The house in Chicago, the one I had built with my own hands, the one I had fought so hard to protect in that living room standoff, was seized. It turned out Brandon had leveraged it to the hilt before he even tried to sell it. There were liens on it, from the bank liens, from the gambling syndicate, and liens from the victims of his other real estate scams. Mr. Henderson asked me if I wanted to fight for it. He said we could probably save it given the fraud. I told him no. I drove past that house one last time. I looked at the oak tree in the front yard. I looked at the stone chimney. It was a beautiful structure, but it was not my home anymore. It was a mausoleum. It held the ghosts of a family that had been destroyed by greed. I told Henderson to let the bank take it. Let them sell it to pay off the people Brandon had hurt. It was the only way to balance the scales. I walked away from $1 million property without looking back because I had learned that some things cost too much to keep. I went back to Gary, back to the house on Jackson Street. But I did not live there alone. During the renovation, I had made a promise to myself. I had promised that if I survived this, I would build something real, something that would last longer than stone or wood. I used the rest of the money I had made from the coin collection, and I took out a small loan against the equity of the renovated house. I bought the abandoned warehouse next to Mick's auto shop. It took us 3 months to clean it out. We worked side by side just like before. But this time we were not building a trap. We were building a future. We opened the Halloway and Mick Trade School. It was not a fancy college. It was a place for kids who had fallen through the cracks. Kids like Brandon could have been if he had not been blinded by easy money. We taught them carpentry. We taught them plumbing. Mick taught them how to rebuild an engine and how to respect a tool. I remember the first day we opened. A group of teenagers walked in looking tough, looking skeptical. They reminded me of myself at that age, rough around the edges and looking for a fight. I stood in front of them holding a piece of raw oak. This wood doesn't care who your daddy is, I told them. It doesn't care how much money you have in your pocket. It only cares if your hands are steady and your mind is focused. If you treat it with respect, it will build you a castle. If you cheat it, it will collapse on your head. One of the boys, a kid named Leo, who had been kicked out of 3 schools, asked me why I was doing this. Why an old man with a nice house would spend his days breathing sawdust with a bunch of delinquents. I looked at him and I saw a spark in his eyes that I had not seen in Brandon's for 20 years. I saw hunger. Not for money, but for purpose. Because I said, handing him a plane, I am trying to build a family, and this time I am using the right materials. Leo became my best student. He had hands of gold. He could feel the grain of the wood before he even touched it. Watching him work, watching him take pride in a dovetail joint, healed a part of me that I thought was dead forever. I realized that legacy isn't about bloodlines. It isn't about passing down a name or a bank account. Legacy is what you teach. It is the skills you pass on. It is the integrity you model. Brandon was my blood, but Leo was my son. In spirit. And that was enough. 6 months later, I was driving down the interstate in my 1978 Chevy Silverado. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a blaze of purple and gold. The truck hummed beneath me. The engine sounded strong thanks to Mick. And the brakes were solid. I had just come from the cemetery. I had visited Catherine's grave. I had cleaned the headstone and planted fresh marigolds. I sat there for an hour and told her everything. I told her about the trial. I told her about the school. I told her about Leo. I told her that I missed her every day, but that I was okay. For the first time in 5 years, I could say that and mean it. I was driving nowhere in particular, just letting the road take me. I rolled down the window, letting the wind hit my face. It was a cold wind, but it felt good. It felt like life. I looked at the empty passenger seat. Sometimes I still instinctively reached over to hold a hand that wasn't there, but the seat wasn't entirely empty. Sitting there was the wooden bird I had carved for her, the one I had rescued from the Chicago house before the bank took the keys. It was the only thing I took. I tapped the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the road. I want to leave you with this thought. I spent 70 years believing that family was the most important thing in the world. I thought that because someone shared your DNA, they automatically deserved your trust, your protection, and your assets. I thought that love was an obligation. I was wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. You do not get to choose who your parents are, and you do not get to choose who your children turn out to be. But family, real family, that is a choice. Real family are the people who show up when you have nothing left to offer but your company. Real family is the mechanic who crawls under your truck in the freezing cold to save your life. Real family is the stranger who brings you a casserole when you are sleeping on a floor. Real family is the kid who looks up to you not because you are rich, but because you know how to hold a hammer. Do not let the guilt of blood blind you to the reality of character. There are people out there who will drain you dry and call it love, and there are people who will fill your cup and ask for nothing in return. Learn the difference. If you are holding on to a relationship just because of history or biology, let go. It is terrifying, I know. I was sleeping in a truck with $15 in my pocket. I thought it was the end, but it was not the end. It was the beginning. It was the beginning of the rest of my life. A life where I am respected not for what I own, but for who I am. I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No one was chasing me. No one was plotting against me. I was free. I pressed the gas pedal. The old truck roared a defiant sound against the coming night. I had a class to teach in the morning. I had a roof to fix. I had a life to live. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the sunrise. I pulled into the gravel lot of the trade school just as the sun broke over the horizon. The light hit the sign Mick and I had hung up yesterday. Halloway and Mick School of Trades. It was simple. It was rough, but it was real. Leo was already there waiting by the door. He was holding a cup of coffee and shivering slightly in the morning chill, but when he saw my truck, his face lit up. That smile, that genuine, uncalculated smile of respect, was worth more than every square inch of the mansion I had lost in Chicago. I parked the truck and stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel. It was the same sound as the night I was kicked out 5 months ago, but the man walking in the boots was different. That night, I was a ghost. Today, I am a man with a mission. Brandon is sitting in a cell right now, staring at gray concrete walls. He chased a fortune and ended up with nothing. I chased the truth and ended up with everything. I lost a son who shared my blood, but I gained a family that shares my values. Mick, Leo, the kids in that workshop who look at me like a grandfather. They are my legacy. They are the foundation that will not crack. To everyone listening to my voice right now, I want you to know one thing. It is never too late to pick up the hammer. It is never too late to tear down the walls that hold you in and build something new. You might be 70 years old. You might be broke. You might be heartbroken. But as long as you have breath in your lungs, you have the power to change your story. Do not let them write your ending. You hold the pen. You hold the hammer. You are the architect. If my journey from a frozen parking lot to this warm sunrise has given you even a spark of hope, please share this story. Share it for the fathers who have been forgotten. Share it for the victims who need to become victors. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel. We are building a community here, one brick of truth at a time, and I want you to be a part of it. I am Victor Halloway, and I have work to do. The class is starting, and I am not going to be late. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the strength to rebuild.